All right, y'all, we're on the last part of my overview with Audre Lorde's Sister Outsider. So let's go ahead. We're going to first deal with this section titled The Uses of Anger, Women Responding to Racism. And she was pretty much delving into the angry black woman stereotype and pretty much explain like black women, their anger is justified, whether it's irrational or rational, because there's so many things that are putting black women in this box. Like they literally rage is literally they have to because of human emotion to oppression and barriers. And she said, women responding to racism means women responding to anger, the anger of exclusion, of unquestioned privilege, of racial distortions, of silence, ill use, stereotyping, defensiveness, misnaming, betrayal, and co optation. Like imagining literally not having the opportunity to be happy, like that's like anger is justified just by that. Like there's so many things that are keeping black women from being empowered and being them and being in tune with their sense of self. Like that should make you angry. Like it makes sense. It doesn't make sense why it's just there's a negative connotation to being angry. So she's pretty much saying you have a right to be angry. Like anger, it feels you have to use that anger. It's what you do with that anger. Like use that anger to fight the system and stuff like that. And and that anger can turn into the pleasurable experience that you deserve in order to and that you need to survive. And then she want everyone to use anger as fury, not suffering, for the sake of survival and not destruction. Which that was pretty much a well-meaning quote and understood. And then she said, but anger expressed and translated into action in the service of our vision and our future is a liberating and strengthening act of clarification, for it is the painful process of this translation that we identify who are our allies with whom we have grave differences and who are our genuine enemies. Like, see who's really about people being people and actually getting the care that they deserve just for being put into this world that they never asked for. So if you're getting a world that you never asked for, you have to do what it takes to get what it takes to have the happiness that you truly deserve, and it shouldn't be at the expense of other people. And then was there anything else that she said? Yes, she said we cannot allow our fear of anger to deflect us nor seduce us into settling for anything less than the hard work of excavating honesty. We must be quite serious about the choice of this topic, and the anger is entwined with it because, rest assured, our opponents are quite serious about their hatred of us and of what we are trying to do here. So the people that are suppressing your happiness, they know what they're doing. Like you can't just ask for crumbs. You have to literally have the whole food because the whole food is going to keep you survive. And the crumbs is just getting you by for like a few seconds. But if you're not getting the whole food, like how else are you going to really survive and be stable enough to go through the day? So, she's pretty much saying don't settle for less and expect the material conditions and needs that you need. And she said, it is not the anger of other women that will destroy us, but our refusals to stand still, to listen to its rhythms, to learn within it, to move beyond the manner of presentation to the substance, to tap that anger as an important source of empowerment. So it's important to not let that anger really dictate, like have some control, make sure you have some control with that anger and use it for something that can actually benefit you. So that this can be literally an organizing lesson you can take in order to build movements that give you the justice that you truly deserve, that from the oppression that's making you have that anger in the first place. And then Lorde said, I have no creative use for guilt, yours or my own. Guilt is only another way of avoiding informed action. So, like white guilt or something. Like, I don't have time for your white people to have tears. I need you to have, I need you to give me the sources I need to survive. And and guilt is also a buying time out of the pressing need to make clear choices, out of the approaching storm that can feed the earth as well as bend the trees. If I speak to you in anger, at least I have spoken to you. I have not put a gun to your head and shot you down in the street. I have not looked at your bleeding sister's body and asked, what did she do to deserve it? This was the reaction of two white women to Mary Church Terrell's telling of the lynching of a pregnant black woman whose baby was then torn from her body. That was in 1921, and Alice Paul had just refused to publicly endorse the enforcement of the 19th Amendment for all women by refusing to endorse the inclusion of women of color, although we have worked to help bring about that amendment. So, like the 19th Amendment, which gave a certain demographic of women, white women, the freedom to vote. Black women still have to go through all these struggles. Like a pregnant woman that was lynched, like how can I not be angry at that? Like that, like you're literally paying yourself silly. And why am I wasting your time focusing? Why should I waste my time focus on your guilt that your community put on my community? So that's literally what Lorde was come from. And she said, for anger between peers, births change, not destruction, and the discomfort and sense of loss it often causes is not fatal, but a sign of growth. So anger helps with accountability processes, like it's a person has a right to be angry, and it should help with your growth to do better or acknowledge something that you did that was wrong, and going through the process to make a situation better. So and the anger is a natural human emotion. Like you can't just say like you have to tone things down. Like you have to understand the gravitas of the situation that it put, an emotional trauma that it put on a person. So that's what that was about. And yeah, Lorde said, I'm a lesbian woman of color whose children eat regularly because I work in a university. If their full bellies make me fail to recognize my commonality with a woman of color whose children do not eat because she cannot find work, or who has no children because of her insides are rotted from home abortions and sterilization, if I fail to recognize the lesbian who chooses not to have children, the woman who remains closeted because her homophobic community is her only life support, the woman who chooses silence instead of another death, the woman who is terrified lest my anger trigger the explosion of hers, if I fail to recognize them as other faces of myself, then I am contributing not only to each of their oppressions, but also to my own. So literally see how these experiences are tied to you, and and have the empathy. Like it's important to have empathy because empathy helps you give a genuine connection between you and other people and what y'all deserve and y'all desire. And the anger which stands between us then must be used for clarity and mutual empowerment, not for evasion by guilt or for further separation. I'm not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own. And I am not free as long as one person of color remains chained, nor is any of you. So that's like the importance of why people use mutual aid and stuff like that, because you, even if you might not have the capability, like it takes community and it takes a village to actually for people to live. Like you can't do everything on your own. You have to get help from others. And she also said, we use whatever strengths we have fought for, including anger, to help define and fashion a world where all our sisters can grow, where our children can love, and where the power of touching and meeting another woman's difference and wonder will eventually transcend the need for destruction. So that's literally like in is something that you have to learn from organizing. And the next section is called Learning from the 60s. So the 60s, which is known as which is notable for the civil rights movement. And I see Audre Lorde has a deep connection with Malcolm X, so pretty much inspiration from him. She's pretty much inspired by his politics, especially after he left the Nation of Islam. And she talked about how much she learned from his philosophy and how he was moving through the world. And she said, as Black people, if there is one thing we can learn from the 60s, it is how infinitely complex any move for liberation must be. For we must move against not only those forces which dehumanize us from the outside, but also against those oppressive values which we have been forced to take into ourselves. Through examining the combination of our triumphs and errors, we can examine the dangers of an incomplete vision. Not not to condemn that vision, but to alter it, construct templates for possible futures, and focus our rage for change upon our enemies rather than upon each other. In the 1960s, the awakened anger of the Black community was often expressed not vertically against the corruption of power and true sources of control over our lives, but horizontally towards those closest to us who mirrored our own impotence. So she pretty much had a critique of the civil rights movement that's similar to Michelle Alexander's, in which it was most focused on um, being represented, but they want to participate in the political arena that Ella Baker was pretty much pressing for participatory democracy, and while there were other people that focused on getting our voting and elected our officials, when it's really up to us to really get the power that we deserve. And she said, we forget that the necessary ingredient needed to make the past work for the future is our energy in the present, metabolizing one into the other. So she sees how Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., they were unpopular during that times, but looking at them now, they're kind of respected. But people still need to understand what makes them, what makes Malcolm X notable figure within like the Black radical tradition, what makes Martin Luther King Jr. Notable in Black radical tradition spaces, and what can we really learn from them to actually create the society that everyone deserves. And going into Michelle Alexander's birdcage metaphor, Lorde said, you have to understand oppression as a multifaceted machine. So knowing how the violence like COINTELPRO and surveillance was going on during the 60s and the 70s, especially on the Black Panther Party and other people that are in the counterculture movement, whether that's the protesters of the Vietnam War and other people that are tend to focus on peace and Black nationalists and all of that, like literally shows like how the state will do what it takes to create this violence that you can tie it to how it's similar to the apartheid in South Africa and imperialist forces that are in other countries, especially third world countries. And what's next after that? You have to build change within yourself and not rely on the Messiah, which is what Ella Baker pushed, like not relying on a leader or male, or that tends to be male and charismatic to be the face of these movements. It takes coalition and people to generate this power and get the freedom that we deserve. So like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a big contributor to why people have voting rights, but it took movements. It didn't take just Dr. King. It took the SCLC, it took SNCC, it took a lot of organizations to actually make the Voting Rights Act happen. And Lorde said we needed articulate power, not conformity. So we can't just have assimilation and integration, because you can get violence just from that. But you have to literally look at the outside. You have to literally look at the outside and connect the puzzles and see everything that's wrong. Like, it literally calls for abolition of the ways the system has everyone operate. And then that motivated her to reclaim and self-empower her queer identity. And she said each one of us here is a link and a connection between anti-poor legislation, gay shootings, the burning of synagogues, street harassment, attacks against women, and resurgent violence against Black people. We do not have to romanticize our past in order to be aware of how it sees our present. Like, people will say just because the civil rights movement happened, racism is over. Like, no, there was a lot of people that died while participating in the civil rights movement, and racism is still permeated through other forms of public policies and government and institutions. And it was mainly focused on specific things, but there's other things that are tied to the puzzle. And yeah, she was going back to I'll go back to her reclaiming her queer identity later. But she said, if our history has taught us anything, is that action for change directed only against the external conditions of our oppressions is not enough. In order to be whole, we must recognize the despair oppression plants within each of us, that thin, persistent voice that says our efforts are useless. It will never change, so why bother? Accept it. And we must fight that inserted piece of self-destruction that lives and flourishes like a poison inside of us, unexamined until it makes us turn upon ourselves and each other. But we can put our finger down upon that loathing buried deep within each one of us and see who it encourages us to despise, and we can lessen its potency by the knowledge of our real connectedness, arcing across our differences. So you literally have to decolonize the way you have to think. And just because something is normal doesn't make it okay. Like, white supremacy is so normalized. Like, there's other facets of white supremacy. And just because it's normal doesn't mean it's okay. Like slavery was something that was normal for over 200 years. And no, that's lifetimes, more than one lifetime. So you have to understand, like, there has to be an abolition and a removal of certain things. And yeah, we're going back. Okay, now into her queer identity. She said, over and over again in the 60s, I was asked to justify my existence and my work. Because I was a woman, because I was a lesbian, because I was not a separatist, because some piece of me was not acceptable. Not because of my work, but because of my identity. I had to learn to hold on to all the parts of me that served me, in spite of the pressure to express only one to the exclusion of all others. And I don't know what I'd say to the face of it was a student at Howard University that antagonized lesbians, and Audre Lorde is a lesbian, who says, I'm filth because I identify women as my primary source of energy and support, except to say that it is my energy and the energy of older women, very much like me, which has contributed to his being where he is at this point. Like, Black queer women movements wouldn't have been as powerful as they are right now and influential if it wasn't for Black queer contributions of Black queer women. So that means something like getting into Howard or something, the foundation of Howard, you don't know if a Black queer woman was responsible for how Howard operates. Like, you're there and antagonizing someone that's in that community, but also part of your community. So you had to understand how oppression operates that way. And yeah, she said the move to render the presence of lesbians and gay men invisible in the intricate fabric of Black existence and survival is a move which contributes to fragmentation and weakness in the Black community. So pretty much including queer folks in Black survival spaces will strengthen the Black community, even though some people said it's a threat to the Black community. And Lorde says, as Malcolm stressed, we are not responsible for our oppression, but we must be responsible for our own liberation. So that was the end of that section. And the next section is titled Eye to Eye, Black Women, Hatred, and Anger. And this one is pretty much talk about internalizing misogynoir, and when Lorde mentioned earlier how patriarchy and misogynoir makes women compete against each other, whether that's through colorism, whether that's through desirability, whether that's through fat phobia, whether that's of course homophobia, but the acceptable woman prize that makes women see the system as their source of support. And she talked about how she was talking about a woman that stared at her and looked at her with such disgust. So that did a lot to Lorde's self-esteem, because Lorde is fat, Black, and dark, and that does a lot to even something as simple as that. It can literally generate some trauma into you. And she talked about when I think she was getting her hair braided, and she was in a Catholic school, and there's a Catholic schools with certain rules. So like Lorde couldn't get her hair braided or something like that. So you could talk about hair discrimination even today. Like there are some businesses that don't allow Black women to wear certain hairstyles, and because it's not deemed as acceptable or professional. So that goes into respectability politics too. And she talked about, she said, for each of us bears the face that hatred seeks, and we have each learned to be at home with cruelty because we have survived so much of it within ourselves. So that can really damage you and make you go through life with that type of mentality. And then she went into her relationship with her mother, which wasn't the best relationship, even though she learned a lot from her mother. And she learned about how literally in a case of survival from her mom, even though she realized that there were some problematic things that her mom did to her. And she talked about another experience where she felt hostility from a Black woman library clerk. So another example of how patriarchy has women socialized into. And Lorde said the power to kill. This was a good paragraph that she said. She said, we are Black women born into a society of entrenched loathing and contempt for whatever is Black and female. We are strong and enduring. We are also deeply scarred. As African women together, we once made the earth fertile with our fingers. We can make the earth bare as well as mount the first line of fire in defense of the king. And having killed in his name and in our own, Harriet's rifle speaks, shouldered in a grim marsh, we still know that the power to kill is less than the power to create, for it produces an ending rather than beginning of something new. So you have to make abolition like a lifestyle. Like it can't just be the end goal. Like you have to create something within abolition and post-abolition. And she was talking about the difference between anger and hatred, and how anger is used and how hatred is used. She said, She defined anger as a passion of displeasure that may be excessive or misplaced, but not necessarily harmful, and hatred as an emotional habit or attitude of mind in which aversion is coupled with ill will. Anger used does not destroy, but hatred does. And she said, anger is useful to help clarify our differences, but in the long run, strength that is bred by anger alone is a blind force which cannot create the future. It can only demolish the past. Such strength does not focus upon what lies ahead, but upon what lies behind, upon what created it. Hatred. And hatred is a death wish for the hated, not a life wish for anything else. So you can get into All About Love, how All About Love is probably influenced from this passage too. And she also said, often we give lip service to the idea of mutual support and connection between Black women because we have not yet crossed the barriers to these possibilities nor fully explored the angers and fears that keep us from realizing the power of a real Black sisterhood. And to acknowledge our dreams is to sometimes acknowledge the distance between those dreams and our present situation. Acknowledge our dreams can shape the realities of our future if we arm them with the hard work and scrutiny of now. We cannot settle for the pretenses of connection or for parodies of self-love. We cannot continue to evade each other on the deepest levels because we fear each other's angers, nor continue to believe that respect means never looking directly nor with openness into another Black woman's eyes. And so even though it's important to have like self-acceptance, self-esteem, and self-love, like you still have to go through these systems that can still harm you or even kill you. So it's nice to have body positivity or something like that, but if there's some culture that's making fat folks die and face violence, like that has to be removed and abolished. So something like that. And then she said, it is easier to be furious than to be yearning. Easier to crucify myself in you than to take on the threatening universe of whiteness by admitting that we are worth wanting each other. So looking back into the Black women, even the Black women that she had some, that had some, that holds some animosity towards her, you can't go through your life thinking about others' perceptions of you. That's white supremacy in itself. You just have to navigate society and challenge systems and policies that are creating the environment that you live in, and what created those instances of harm. And then Lorde was talking about she was talking about her daughter Beth and the anxiety that she was going through when she was raising a college daughter. So Lorde tied to her experience as a professor. So think about the violence that college students face, like the student debt crisis and stuff like that, like sexual violence that college students go through. So she realizes you have to let your child fend for themselves. They have to use the tools that you gave them, the lessons that you brought, and they have to apply those. So but she also know that her daughter is a Black woman and is in living in a misogynistic society. So you have to make your environment like a way to build a community and environment that tries to resist all of those. And she said, Black women give our children forth into a hatred that seared our own young days with bewilderment, hoping we have taught them something they can use to fashion their own new and less costly pathways to survival. Knowing I did not slit their throats at birth, tear out the tiny beating heart with my own despairing teeth, the way some sisters did in the slave ships chained to corpses, and therefore was I committed to this very moment. So she pretty much went into that, and there's a way of care that Black mothers provide, and you have the nurturing and care and love that your mom gave you, you also had to give that to yourself. So she saw that as a sense of practice too. And yeah, she talked about how yeah, then the next part is when she was talking about how romance with her partner Francis told Audre about love, acceptance, and validation. So like she realized that her lover loves her for her. She had to accept herself, and that made and grow within herself. So that helped her learn what love can look like, and acceptance and validation. Like you're someone validated you because you're validated yourself. So that's something that's beautiful. And she talked how important it is for Black women to support each other in the going through a society that tries to break you and hate you. And let's see. Yeah, Lorde said, I am hungry for Black women who will not turn from me in anger and contempt even before they know me or hear what I have to say. I am hungry for Black women who will not turn away from me even if they do not agree with what I say. We are, after all, talking about different combinations of the same borrowed sounds. And knowing that not every Black woman is going to be with the struggle, it's important to look to their experiences on how you can build a better world and realize what also is wrong with the world. And yeah, she said also dealing with her perceptions from others. She said, when there is no connection at all between people, then anger is a way of bringing them closer together, of making contact. But there is a great deal of connectedness that is problematic or threatening or unacknowledged. Then anger is a way of keeping people separate, of putting distance between us. So you have to look at, yeah, so anger, it can be an uncomfortable situation between the parties, but if they don't deal with those issues, then we're not living for the same things. And she also said, when I can recognize my worth, I can recognize yours. And that's literally pretty much how you have to go through life, even with people that don't vibe with you. So you have to not care what others think, but community, but look to the people that do accept you and love you, that genuinely love you. And she talked about pretty much being the acceptable Black woman. Um, she said, acting like an insider and feeling like the outsider, hence the title Sister Outsider, preserving our self rejection as Black women at the same time as we're getting over, we think. And political work will not save our souls, no matter how correct and necessary that work is. Yet it is true that without political work, we cannot hope to survive long enough to affect any change. And self empowerment is the most deeply political work there is and the most difficult. A piece of the price we paid for learning survival was our childhood. We were never allowed to be children. It is the right of children to be able to play a little living for a little while, but for a Black child, every act can have deadly, serious consequences, and for a Black girl child, even more so. Ask the ghosts of 4 little Black girls blown up in Birmingham. Ask Angel Lanier or Latanya Wilson or Cynthia Montgomery, the 3 girl victims in the infamous Atlanta murders, none of whose deaths have been resolved. That is carrying a time bomb wired to our emotions. So, like, literally, you have to talk about the experiences like the ones that Lorde talks about to know that these things need to be addressed, and there needs to be some resolution on how those things don't have to happen again. Because like there are Black girls that were blown in a church, like they have, there's so much life that they could have lived if that misogynoir didn't exist. And it's unfortunate that there are Black children that even get that even get shot by, and killed by police and stuff like that. So it's like black children can't even be children. Their blackness literally affects them through a place where you don't know when your life is going to end. And she said, "There is a distinction I am beginning to make in my living between pain and suffering. Pain is an event, an experience that must be recognized, named, and then used in some way in order for the experience to change and to be transformed into something else, strength or knowledge or action. Suffering, on the other hand, is a nightmare reliving of unscrutinized and unmetabolized pain. When I live through pain without recognizing it self-consciously, I rob myself of the power that can come from using that pain, the power to fuel some movement beyond it. I condemn myself to reliving that pain over and over and over whenever something close triggers it. And that is suffering, a seemingly inescapable cycle. And true, experiencing old pain sometimes feels like hurling myself full force against a concrete wall, but I remind myself that I have lived through it all already and survived. So look into how you go through a situation and how you manage to build the power to get the healing that you need, the love that you got from people, the how you can contribute to the world, how you can help others. Like if you have that type of centering, you literally survive pain every way it goes, and you don't have to suffer. And suffering is something that it literally can kill you inside and make you go through something that have an instability that you shouldn't have to go through. And she said, "What does that mean for Black women? It means we must establish authority over our own definition, provide an attentive concern and expectation of growth, which is the beginning of that acceptance we came to expect only from our mothers. It means that I affirm my own worth by committing myself to my own survival and my own self and then the self of other Black women. On the other hand, it means that as I learn my worth and genuine possibility, I refuse to settle for anything less than a rigorous pursuit of the possible in myself, at the same time making a distinction between what is possible and what the outside world drives me to do in order to prove I am human. It means being able to recognize my successes and to be tender with myself even when I fail." So she talked about the importance of mothering yourself. So give yourself credit, do things to open your heart to love and give love to others, and define situations for yourself, like read the room and stuff like that. You try to make the care that makes an environment stable and healthy. And I like that quote too, a lot. And she said we should open love for love beyond desirability. So whether that's food security, employment, and stuff like that, like don't look just focus on your life on desirability, even though desirability can help with some things. But go into the systematic hatred that created a certain type of desirability that doesn't humanize you. And yeah, she also said be gentle with your inner child and have a radical love and try to promote radical love and do what you have to do to live and care for the people that surround you and make you be your most authentic self. And yeah, that's it for that section. And this is the last piece, y'all. The last section is Grenada Revisited, an interim report. And for those who don't know, Audre Lorde, she's Caribbean, and I think she lived in Grenada for a period of time. I think her mom is Grenadian. And she pretty much talked about how she felt liberated going to Grenada, the sense of community that she gets, and it's kind of similar to how Assata Shakur came to Cuba. That experience felt like you're free from such violence, especially from the United States Empire, going to Grenada or somewhere it can be fulfilling. And it's a majority black nation, so racism looks different in Grenada than racism in the United States, but it's not as overt as in the United States. But she was talking about the U.S. She was mainly talking about the United States invasion in Grenada in 1983, and she got into her internationalist thinking. So she was talking about imperialism and how the United States was influencing and creating such corruption to sanction Grenada. So she so the way it came about was that the United States was stopping Western money coming into Grenada, because I think the United States didn't have that much influence at the time, but it had some influence to the point where it has the currency of Grenada being stopped, and Grenada needed some money. So I think it's kind of similar to how Haiti needed Haitians are owed something from France after France tried to colonize Haitians, but Haiti managed to get independence. But Haiti was still going through some issues, some financial troubles and stuff like that. So Grenada was pleading for the United States to give them the resources that they need, and the United States was literally trying to overstep them boundaries and created such a militaristic intervention that it led to such violence. There's no numbers on how many people died. Like, it looked like it's similar to the Holocaust or the Rwandan genocide. Like, you know how there's this stereotype of Cubans and communism and stuff like that. Like, it's the same thing that's happened in Grenada when the media and there was a distortions of Grenadian representation in Western media. Like, this intervention is considered a rescue mission from Cubans, but how is it a rescue mission when it's literally state-sanctioned violence? So it tells you about how the United States talks about international issues and why they feel the need to go to other countries and have some influence to those countries. And she also compared the struggles that Grenadian people were going through to the struggles that African Americans were going through in the United States, such as Red Summer, Seneca Village, which was a black town, was a prosperous black town, and there was some violence that was going on in that town because black people were being sustainable in there, and then a lot of black people got killed. It was kind of similar to Black Wall Street, and it's now known as Central Park, and also talked about the police violence there and the trauma that created to families of people that were killed in Grenada, and that it gave her a more global consciousness of anti-blackness and how capitalism, imperialism, and colonialism are intertwined, and also the reason the United States invaded Grenada was known for their cocoa. It was the second highest production of cocoa. So thinking about oil in the Middle East and how the United States has influence and interventions in there, and it's literally agro imperialism. So think about agriculture and how there's an imperialist strategy for agriculture. So, and it also led to this U.S. I think it was even before the invasion. The Prime Minister Morris Bishop died, and knowing how the FBI and the CIA work and how COINTEL literally contributed to the silencing and suppression of counterculture during the 70s. Lorde felt like there was something going on that the U.S. did to that led to the death of Morris Bishop. So the death of black liberators and stuff like that. And yeah, she said how important it is to have a revolution. She said, "Revolution, a nation decides for itself what it needs, how best to get it. Food, dentists, doctors, roads. When I first visited Grenada in 1978, 1/3 of the farmable land in the country lay idle, owned by absentee landlords who did not work it. The PRG required that plans be filed either for farming that land, turning it over to those who would, or deeding it to the state. Small banana collectives started, fishing cooperatives, beginning agro-industry. The World Bank notes the health of Grenadian economy, surpassing all other Caribbean economies in the rate of its growth and stability despite the opposition of the U.S. Unemployment dips from 40% to 14%. Now there is no work again." So she talked about before the invasion, Grenada was doing economically well. And then when it got to a place where the U.S. got involved and then led to the invasion, unemployment was skyrocketing because they bombed a lot of facilities and places where people were being employed. And Laura tied this to the war in Vietnam. She said, how better to wipe out the better memories of Vietnam defeats by yellow people than with a restoration of power in the eyes of the American public. The image of American Marines splashing through a little black blood. If the United States is even remotely interested in seeing democracy flourish in the Caribbean, why does it continue to support Haiti and the Dominican Republic, two of the most corrupt and repressive governments in the Americas? The racism that coasts the U.S. government lies about Grenada is the same racism that blinded American eyes to the black faces of 131 Haitians washed up on shore in Miami, drowned fleeing the Duvalier regime. It is the same racism that keeps American eyes turned aside from the corrosive apartheid eating like acid into the face of white South Africa and the Reagan government, which shares her bed under the guise of constructive engagement. So I don't know if people know this, but the people that are most likely to get deported in the United States are Haitians because of anti-blackness. So you can't talk about so there is a race analysis for immigrant deportation. So you have to talk about the issues that are going through Haiti and the people of Haiti. And yeah, then she was talking about she also talked about PSYOPs, PSYOPS, the Psychological Operations Unit of the U.S. Occupation Forces. So I think that's kind of similar to COINTELPRO. It's like a psychological military operation that was used for combat and imperialist reasons. And then Lorde said, the action in Grenada served many purposes for the United States, provided the grounds for many tests. A major one was addressed to the concern long expressed by the Pentagon as to whether or not Black American soldiers could be gotten to fire upon other Black people. This becomes a vital question as the U.S. military-industrial complex executes increasing military solutions to this country's precarious position in the third world, where the U.S. either ignores or stands upon the wrong side of virtually every single struggle for liberation by oppressed peoples. Of course, there were also lesser tests. In addition to trying out new armaments, there was the question of whether the Marines liked their new Nazi-style helmets. They did not because they couldn't shave in them, and whether the new army uniforms were so too heavy to be worn comfortably in the tropics. They were. So she was talking about how not only the United States is a police state, but it's literally a military expansive corporation. Like the United States trying to influence and intervene in literally every country and trying to show democracy and power through military and imperialist forces. And the United States is usually always in a war, and it's been pretty much in war ever since it's founded. So it makes you really question the use of the military and the violence that has been sanctioned by that's been approved and sanctioned by the state. And and then I think that gets into the last portion, the last paragraph, was where she visited Grenada after the invasion happened, and she said even though there was a lot of destruction, she saw like the people were still filled with love and care, and that gave Lorde some hope that better can come. She said, I also came for reassurance and see if Grenada has survived the onslaught of the most powerful nation on earth. She has. Grenada is bruised but very much alive. Grenadians are a warm and resilient people. I hear my mother's voice. Island women make good wives. Whatever happens, they've seen worse, and they have survived colonizations before. I am proud to be of stock from the country that mounted the first black English-speaking people's revolution in this hemisphere. Much has been terribly lost in Grenada, but not all. Not the spirit of the people. Forever, forward ever, backward never is more than a mere whistle in the present dark. So think about all the violence that black women, black queer people, black poor people, and people that live in countries like Haiti, Grenada, and other colonized and post-colonized nations. People managed to live through all of that, so that gave Lorde hope, and know that if as long as people say what's in their hearts and be convicted to be and to embrace their humanness and their wholeness and be open themselves to the fight for liberation, then anything can happen, no matter what the white supremacist imperialist machine tries to do to break them and hate them and break them and cause all this violence. So that motivated Lorde to center global consciousness and internationalist perspectives in her politics. Well, all right, y'all. So that's the end of Sister Outsider. Thank you for going through these videos with me, and I'm glad that I finally got to read a book again. It's been a long time, but I finally got to it. And stay tuned for another video. Make sure you follow my reading list page on Instagram at Raisin Souls, and at my personal at Intellectual Albert. It'll be on the description box below. And yeah, happy African Liberation Month. Take care, and see you later.